A black delivery driver faces a shocking amount of disrespect from a wealthy neighborhood, but when he reveals his true identity as the CEO of the company delivering their packages, the tables are turned, leaving the residents to face the consequences of their actions. This powerful story shows how one man's dignity and strength can change everything. Marcus adjusted his cap and glanced at the next address on his delivery list. It was a high-end neighborhood, the kind with gated mansions and pristine lawns that seemed too perfect to be real. He had been driving for the same logistics company for years, and he had delivered to places like this plenty of times. He knew the routine: pull up, drop off the package, and move on. As he rolled into the driveway of an enormous white stone house, Marcus couldn't help but admire the property. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and the lawn looked as if each blade of grass had been individually trimmed. He parked his van near the gate, grabbed the small but heavy package from the back, and walked toward the entrance. He rang the doorbell and waited. Seconds later, the door creaked open, revealing an older man with neatly combed gray hair, dressed in an expensive sweater and slacks. His sharp blue eyes swept over Marcus, and immediately his expression hardened. Marcus gave a polite nod. "Good afternoon, sir. I have a delivery for Mr. Harrison." The man scoffed. "That's me. What do you want?" Marcus held up the package. "Just need a quick signature and I'll be on my way." "Mr. Harrison folded his arms. "You people don't usually ask for signatures. What's in there?" Marcus kept his professional demeanor. "Sir, I don't know. I just deliver." The older man sighed heavily, rolling his eyes. "Figures, always playing dumb. Fine, give me the clipboard." Marcus handed it over, biting his tongue. He had dealt with customers like this before, ones who saw his skin color before his professionalism. As Mr. Harrison signed, a sleek black security car pulled up. A uniformed guard stepped out and gave Marcus a suspicious look, as if he was the problem. Something told Marcus this delivery wasn't going to go as smoothly as he'd hoped. Just as Marcus was about to turn and leave, Mr. Harrison let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "You think you can just waltz up here with a package and act like you belong?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Marcus froze, his hand on the van door. He had heard this kind of thing before, people assuming he wasn't worthy of respect simply because of his job and his appearance. He kept his voice steady, trying to stay calm. "I'm just doing my job, sir. I don't mean any trouble." Mr. Harrison sneered. "Trouble? You? Trouble? It's not about trouble, it's about trust. Do you honestly think I'm going to hand my signature over to some guy who could barely afford to get that van of yours running?" The words stung, but Marcus had learned to keep his emotions in check. He had been called worse. But the sheer arrogance of it, the assumption that Marcus was nothing more than a faceless worker who didn't matter, made his blood boil. As he handed the clipboard back, Mr. Harrison gave him a pointed look. "Next time, don't come to my door. I don't need anyone like you around here. Go back to your little delivery van and leave me alone." Marcus could feel the heat rise in his chest, but he took a deep breath and forced himself to smile. "I'll leave now, sir. Have a good day." He turned toward the van, gripping the door harder than usual, fighting the urge to snap back at the man who had just humiliated him for no reason. The security guard was standing by the gate, arms crossed, watching Marcus intently. He barely acknowledged him, but Marcus could feel the judgment in the guard's eyes. Before he could get in the van, "Mr. Pfo," Harrison called out to the security guard. "Keep an eye on him. I don't trust these people. He shouldn't be here." The words hung in the air, and Marcus swallowed hard, refusing to let the tears of anger welling up in his eyes spill over. He didn't need to explain himself to anyone, especially not to someone like him. As he drove off, he couldn't help but think about how many people lived in places like this. People who thought their money and their skin color made them better than someone like him. Marcus pulled out of the gated driveway, his grip tight on the steering wheel. He didn't look back, but he could feel the eyes of the security guard on him, could almost hear the man whispering to Mr. Harrison. He wanted to shake it off, but he couldn't. The injustice burned inside him, leaving him feeling small and powerless. As he turned the corner onto the main street, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled over and checked the notification, a call from his manager. "Hey, Marcus," his manager Paul greeted him. "How's it going? Everything good with your route today? Marcus took a deep breath before answering. Yeah, everything's fine, just a little issue with one of the customers. No big deal. Trouble with a customer? Paul asked, his voice concerned. You okay? Marcus hesitated. I'll be fine. I'll be fine, just dealing with some disrespect. I'll keep going. There was a pause before Paul replied. If you need me to handle it, let me know. Don't let these people get to you. You're doing a great job. Marcus appreciated the support, but nothing could take away the sting of what had just happened. He shook his head, trying to refocus on the job at hand. About an hour later, he was back on the same route, delivering packages to other high-end homes. But when he arrived at his next stop, things took an unexpected turn. As he walked up to the front door of another large house, he saw a familiar face in the yard. Mrs. Carter, an older woman who lived in the neighborhood, was sitting on her porch sipping tea. She waved at him as he approached. "Hello, Marcus?" she called, her voice warm and friendly. Marcus smiled and waved back. He had always liked Mrs. Carter. She was one of the few kind neighbors he had met in this area. But just as he was about to knock on the door, he saw the security guard from earlier pull up behind him. The guard was walking briskly toward him, and Marcus could feel his heart drop. "Hey!" The guard barked, glaring at Marcus. "What are you doing here? You're not welcome." Marcus froze, feeling his stomach twist with humiliation. Mrs. Carter stood up quickly. "Excuse me?" she demanded, her voice sharper than Marcus had ever heard it. "What are you doing?" The guard hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, but then he looked at Marcus with disdain. "I'm just making sure this guy doesn't cause any trouble." Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow. "This is Marcus. He's the one who delivers your packages." The guard rolled his eyes. "Doesn't matter, you don't know him like I do." Before Marcus could say anything, Mrs. Carter stepped forward. "I do know him. And you better watch how you treat people, because I won't stand for this disrespect." The tension hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Marcus could see the guard hesitate. Marcus stood there, a mixture of confusion and relief flooding through him as Mrs. Carter spoke up for him. He had never expected anyone to stand up for him, especially not in this neighborhood. The security guard mumbled something under his breath, looking uncertain for the first time. But before he could respond, Mrs. Carter turned to Marcus with an intense look in her eyes. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm, "there's something you should know." Marcus frowned, not sure what she meant. "What do you mean?" She glanced at the guard, then back at Marcus. "I don't think you realize just who you're dealing with here. You've been so humble about it, but..." She paused for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "You don't just work here. You own this neighborhood." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean what?" "I know you've been keeping a low profile," Mrs. Carter continued, "but you're not just the delivery guy. You're the new CEO of the company that handles all of the deliveries for this entire community. This entire neighborhood, is part of your company's contract." Marcus felt his stomach drop, his heart pounding. He had never mentioned his position to anyone here. No one knew who he really was. But now, the pieces were falling into place. The way Mrs. Carter had spoken so confidently, the way she had stepped in when no one else would. "I didn't want to use that power," Marcus muttered, barely able to comprehend the weight of her words. Mrs. Carter gave him a knowing look. "You don't have to. But you can use it, and now might be the perfect time to let everyone here know exactly who you are." At that moment, Marcus turned to look at the security guard, who was standing there, unsure of what to do. His entire demeanor had changed from authority to embarrassment. "I didn't know," the guard stammered. His confidence shattered. "I just assumed." "Clearly," Marcus interrupted, his voice cold and steady. "You assumed wrong." And just as he was about to turn to leave, he noticed Mr. Ray Harrison himself walking toward them, his face red with frustration. I'm terribly sorry, but Mr. Harrison started, his tone awkward, realizing too late how he had treated Marcus. Marcus cut him off, his eyes hardening. "You don't get to apologize now. Your actions have already spoken louder than any words could." Mrs. Carter watched in silence, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. She knew something was about to shift. Marcus turned back to the security guard. "Make sure this man knows how to treat people with respect next time. Maybe a lesson in humility would do him some good. As he stepped into his van, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of power surge through him. But it wasn't about power, it was about dignity. And he had just reclaimed his. Marcus didn't wait to hear Mr. Harrison's apology. He didn't need to. He had heard enough hollow words from people like him to last a lifetime. As he drove out of the neighborhood, the weight of the moment settled over him. He wasn't sure what to expect when he returned, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't be forgotten. The next day, as Marcus prepared for another round of deliveries, he received an unexpected call from his assistant, Laura. "Marcus, I'm so sorry to bother you on your day off, but we just got a call from that neighborhood. The one with Mr. Harrison's house." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. What happened now? "They want to apologize. All of them." Marcus was taken aback. "What do you mean, all of them?" "Mr. Harrison, the security guard, and a few of the other residents. They've apparently all realized their mistake." He was silent for a moment, considering the news. It wasn't about the apology, it was about the way they'd all treated him like less than human. "Tell them I don't want to hear it," Marcus said finally. "They'll learn better when they see it for themselves." Laura hesitated. "Marcus, they're asking for you to come back. They're offering—" "No," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I'm going to make the decision that's best for the company. If they can't respect the people doing their job, they don't deserve to have us around." Laura was quiet for a moment, then replied, "I understand. I'll handle it from here." Marcus hung up, a deep sense of satisfaction spreading through him. He wasn't here to play games or prove anything. He was here to do his job, and that, in itself, was the greatest form of dignity. Later that week, an official notice went out to the residents of the neighborhood. Due to unacceptable behavior from a small number of individuals, all deliveries would be suspended for the time being. The news spread quickly through the community, and before long, people were whispering about the mysterious CEO who had made the decision to stop servicing their neighborhood. The ones who had been rude, dismissive, and disrespectful were now left to wonder. What had they really lost? As Marcus received call after call from the residents who wanted to plead their case, he stood firm. It wasn't about getting back at them, it was about teaching them a lesson in humility. "Respect," he would say when they called, "isn't something you demand, it's something you give, and I'll teach you that with one simple decision." Weeks passed, and the neighborhood began to feel the effects of Marcus's decision. The residents who had once arrogantly dismissed him now found themselves scrambling to find another delivery service for their high-end packages. But no one could offer the same reliability, the same efficiency, or the same care that Marcus's company had provided. As the days wore on, the whispers grew louder. Neighbors who had stood by while Mr. Harrison mocked Marcus were now quietly regretting their indifference. Mrs. Carter, who had always been a beacon of kindness in the neighborhood, was one of the few who still spoke openly about what had happened. She was now seen as a hero for standing up for Marcus, her words a reminder to everyone that treating people with respect was more important than any contract or status symbol. One afternoon, as Marcus made his usual rounds, he found himself back at the neighborhood entrance. He wasn't delivering anything this time. He was here to pick up his company's last packages, as he had decided to end service to the entire area permanently. As he passed Mr. Harrison's mansion, he saw the elderly man standing on his front porch, looking out at Marcus's van. His face was a mixture of frustration and remorse. The pride that had once made him feel untouchable now seemed like a distant memory. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, hesitating for a moment before calling out, "Marcus, wait." Marcus paused but didn't turn around right away. He had heard all the apologies he needed. "Please, I want to say I'm sorry." Mr. Harrison continued, his voice strained. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you like that. Can you reconsider? We all know you were right." Marcus finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable. He took a deep breath, then spoke. "Your apology is too late," he said calmly. "It's not about me, it's about how we treat people. You disrespected me, but more importantly, you disrespected everyone like me, the people who work hard every day to make your life easier. You don't get to take that back." Mr. Harrison's face flushed, but there was nothing he could say. He was left standing there, a broken man, with no more excuses. Marcus climbed into his van, his hands steady on the wheel. It wasn't revenge that satisfied him. It was knowing that he had stood up for himself and others, that he had taught a lesson that couldn't be undone. As he drove away, he felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time, he realized that respect didn't need to be earned by money or title. It was something you gave to everyone, no matter who they were or where they came from. And in the end, that was the real victory.